You may not be my biological uncle, Marv, but you are truly an uncle. And I am so delighted that you are here with us today. I'm going to defer the actual introduction of Marv Parshall today to his stepson, or son, depending on how you want to look at it. Mike West will be up here in just a moment. I'm here to do some of the housekeeping things. If you need to use the ladies' or men's room, they're right through the door back there. And we have lots of wonderful refreshments provided by Parshall and West Law Firm. Oh. So I want to thank Mike for providing that for us today. So let's give Mike a round of applause. And did I miss any other little details? Okay. I do want to tell you, there's some nifty things happening here at the Schoharie County Historical Society. This Thursday night at 7 o'clock, we are starting a genealogy series, and it is a 5-piece series that will be done monthly until the last one being in June. So if you have an interest in finding out who you are, please come see Erica and I about signing up, and it's free for members, so hint, hint, if you're a member, just saying. We'd love to have you there Thursday night. April, our lecture series for the winter will wrap up with a program on Iroquois or Haudenosaunee history by Glenn Benz, who, if you've been to Stone Fort Days here, he does a terrific program, and he is part Seneca, so he knows what he's talking about. And so he'll be doing that in April 20, I'm drawing a blank, it's 20, something like that. It's the last, follow us on Facebook, that seems to know what's going on, even if we are not so good. So anyway, with no further ado, let me introduce Mike West.
First housekeeping chore I'm going to mention is I don't want to go away with any donuts, any brownies. In fact, while Marv's talking, which will probably be till tomorrow, I'm probably going to go out and get some more items because it looks like we have a lot of folks. Thank you for coming, and it really is an honor. My name is Mike West. I'm also the president here of the Historical Society and have been for many years. So I guess an introduction of my dad. I call my dad because he's been my stepdad for 45 years, and that's really all I've known. He kind of droned that into my brain years ago. What I have to say, as a kid growing up with Marv, you know, every boy wants to go see the Yankees play. It just never happened. It's like every time the Dodgers were in town, was to see the Dodgers. So as a kid growing up, you know, I wanted to see the likes of Mantle and all those guys. It just never happened. But, you know, of course, I grew up on these stories, and I don't think I've heard all the stories, because I know there's quite a few. So I'd like to introduce my dad, Marv Parshall. He's been my stepdad for 45 years, my law partner for 35 years, and our other law partner, JR, is part of the firm, and we've got a newbie coming in pretty soon, Brandon. So I guess Marv's legacy shall continue. So, Marv, would you please entertain us?
Melinda said, "Will you need a microphone?" And I says, "I don't think so." The neighbor says, when I'm on the phone in the office, she can hear me over in her house. So I don't think I'll have any trouble here. Thank all of you for coming. I recognize a lot of you. Some of you have stood up here and introduced yourselves, so it's been quite memorable to see all of you here. I'm not going to talk just on baseball. I'm going to talk a little bit of the history of the area. But unfortunately, the history I'm talking about is in Otsego County, the adjoining county, because that's where I grew up as a youngster, went to school there. My family all came from that area. So, but there's a little history involved which will lead up to the baseball, and that's why I give you this for introduction. I see Ed Badgley here from Cooperstown, an old friend of mine. When I came in today, I saw the Badgley Museum. Ed I've known for 60, 70 years as a pharmacist in Cooperstown. Ed Badgley, I guess most of you know the Badgley family. So anyway, growing up in the Cooperstown area, my father was a small farmer, dirt farmer, hard worker, and they grew hops as a cash crop along with the chickens and the cows and the horses and all that. And he was a good horseman. And in growing hops, in the fall of the year, in growing hops, they had to be tended to. You had to pick the hops, of course, off the vines, and of course you had to do what you had to do to get them sold to the breweries. So, in the fall of the year, they would have a train come into Cooperstown with hop pickers, they called them, just like you've heard the migrant workers, or the pea pickers, or the corn pickers, or whatever. And they weren't the bad type of people, the young people in the city that wanted to get up in the country, have a good time, get acquainted with the local girls, etc., etc. These would be, you know, late teenagers, early 20-year-old people. So my father, this farm we had was a small one. It wasn't mine, it was my father's and his father, my grandfather's, was on the road from Cooperstown to Cherry Valley, County Route 33, about 2 miles out of Cooperstown. So they're out there working in the hop fields, my father, his father, and these two men walk up the road. So they got talking to my father, and they said, well, where are you from? They said, we just got off the train, you know, coming out of New York City. We're looking for a little work and a little fun. A couple of men, early 20s. So my father said, yeah, we can use you here. We can use you right here, taking care of things. So in the hop growing business, I don't know if you're acquainted with it, some of you older people, the Pindar farm over there on 145 and 30 was one of the big hop growing farms around. I can remember going to New York City, and you'd see all the vines and the wires and the poles and all that. There was a lot of hop growing. Well, Middlefield, where I grew up out of Cooperstown, was one of the bigger hop growing areas in the state. As a matter of fact, if you know, Anheuser-Busch, the founder of Budweiser, came from the Cooperstown area. And they had the big estate outside 3 Mile Point. If you know the big Anheuser-Busch estate. Ed, you know about it there. And I'll get off on tangents here as we're talking. I can remember as a kid, and this all ties into the story, that we got out of school. I was in the 6th grade. We got out of school one day during World War II. They let us out to go to the Anheuser-Busch estate. They had a humongous field there, probably 100 acres, across from 3 Mile Point, and it was all grown up to milkweed. We had to go with these big sacks to pick the milkweed pod. But getting out of school was fun, to get out of school to pick milkweed pods. Does anybody here know what milkweed pods were used for?
Yes.
Ed, what?
Parachutes.
Parachutes. You picked the milkweed pods, the silk in the pods, they took off and made parachutes. And this was in World War II. So that got a little history in the area. I don't know if they were picking milkweed pods in Schoharie County, but we did in Otsego County. So my father had these men come along to help him in the hop business. They had to pick off the hops, and they had boxes to put them in. They would be built like a coffin, the box a couple of feet wide, 6, 7 feet long, and they'd have these hops put in there and then taken to a hop house. Now, you know what a hop house is? It's a sort of a square building. It isn't a barn, and it's got coming to a point and then a cupola on top. That's called the old hop house. The reason for that is they would have the hops in there, and because they were green, they would ferment and get moldy. So they wanted to dry them out. That's where they dried them out in these barns. And then the steam would come up out of the cupola at the top. Well, on that road, there was a broker, a hop broker, by the name of Mokler. Ed probably heard that name around Cooperstown. He owned the bank. He was just a farmer that was in the area. And he was able to take these hops that were in these boxes and broker them to New York City or wherever, Boston or wherever, as a broker of hops. So it's got a little history there. Well, anyway, to get to my story, got any water back there? The two men come up the road. So my father said, yeah, we'll hire you, he and my grandfather. So they had him, they were able to pick the hops, and along with that, they had to prepare the hops for the next season. A hop isn't transplanted every year, there's roots in the ground, and they're perennial. Of course, some would die over the course of winter, and you'd have to replace them. But the hops, they had to be prepared for the winter. So after they picked the hops off the vines, they then had to cut the vines down and then bank them with a compost. But in those days, they used horse manure to protect the vines' roots so that they would grow next year. That would be one of the jobs they had to do. Thank you. They also had to go in the woods and cut poles, because the hop poles would be about as high as this room. So they had to go in the woods, cut trees, they come down and get them, ready, straight poles, put in the ground, and then the wires so they could grow hops for the next year. So at the end of the season, along in September, October, two men said, well, we're going back to the city. You have no more work for us, but you're a good man with horses. We can get you a job down in Brooklyn, driving horses on a milk truck. My father was a good man with horses. He could look at a horse in the eye and see if the horse was gentle or if it was a kicker or violent. He'd walk around, I'd see him, when he would go buy a horse, I'd go with him to the auction, and he'd walk around, touch the horse, look at him in the eye. He said, that horse has got a treacherous eye. So he wouldn't buy it. So anyway, they said, we'll get you a job in Brooklyn. So he went to Brooklyn, got a job driving a milk wagon. Well, these two men had a younger sister. Her name was Helen. My father took a liking to her, and he married her eventually, so she's my mother. So how's this going to tie in with the Dodgers? Well, I'll tell you. They wanted to come back into the area. My father wanted to stay here in the country. My mother did too. She hated the city. She says, I want to keep my family in upstate New York, in the country, to raise my family in the country. Well, the two brothers stayed still in Brooklyn. Well, thereafter, the one brother got a job with the Dodgers. He worked in the office. He was a bookkeeper, payroll master, wrote the checks, did payrolls, and so forth. He'd come up and visit with us quite frequently. So I said to him one day, I said, oh, Uncle John, if you can get me a job at Ebbets Field, I'll do anything. I'll polish the seats, I'll mow the grass, I'll do the chalk lines, I'll do anything. Get me to Ebbets Field. Well, I like sports, played it in high school, played it in college, so I was very sports prone. So that's why I had that feeling I wanted to get involved in sports. So one day, early in 1950, he called me. He says, can you be here tonight? We got an opening for a ballboy. I said, I'll be there. My mother, me as a kid going to Brooklyn, she wanted to get out of there. I said, I want to go to Brooklyn. So hopped a bus in Schoharie Valley. There was no other way I could get there in those days. Route 20 had the bus line. Took the bus from Schoharie Valley. Never been to New York or Brooklyn before. By Uncle Mebney at Penn Station. I think it was Penn Station where the buses were. And took me over to Brooklyn. Introduced me to the people. Put a uniform on me. I was ready. Night game, I don't remember who they were playing. I was so, enthralled by the situation that I don't remember exactly what happened, but the players were nice, everything was fine, the lights were brilliant, something different than around here. If you went to a night game in Albany in those days, you could hardly see the outfielders. Or in Oneonta, they had lights in Neowar Park. The ball would be hit up there in the fog, and the outfielders were looking around like this, didn't know where the ball was. By right, you're shaking your head. So anyway, I was there, uniform on and all. Well, in a few days, Jackie Robinson says, Whitey, come over here. I want to warm up with you. None of the other players did it. So Jackie, I says, all right. I had a little leather glove about the size of my hand. And today they got a bushel basket they sent him in. So I had a glove. He didn't have a big glove either. So we're there, probably length room apart. He was a second baseman. He had a snap throw, real strong snap. So I was there, big catching, snapping. Then, of course, the harder he threw, the harder I wanted to throw back to show him that he wasn't going to beat me. And he didn't. Because I was just as feisty as he was those days. So, as a second baseman, that was the throw. Now, he would warm up because he knew he had to throw in that direction to the first baseman. So then, after that, a day or two later, he said, let's play pepper. How many of you know what pepper is in baseball? Well, I'll tell you. Pepper, when home plate is here, and the outfield's that way, the batter stands by home plate. Behind you is the backstop and the screen and the stands. So the batter's up by home plate, and you throw it to him, and he smashes it to you to see how good your reflexes are to catch it. If you miss it, of course, the backstop is there. You can pick it up and fire it back to him again. So we played pepper frequently. Well, my job as a ball boy was to take care of the balls. And they would come in dozen boxes like that. So you can look at these later. I got some all still wrapped up with a Spalding label on it. And there's a little irony to that. I was in Schoharie Valley one day when I was a young lawyer, and I had to meet somebody. So a person said, you go up, there's a little factory up the street here in Schoharie Valley. You can see that person up there in that factory. So I walked up the stairs, and the room was any bigger than this, and it was 8 or 10, 12 women on these big machines. They were stitching baseballs. Stitching baseballs in Schoharie Valley and selling them to major leagues or colleges or whatever. But they had to be inspected, of course, each ball with the stitching to make sure the stitches were right, because if the stitches weren't right, they'd be rejected. So a lot of these balls in those days came from Schoharie Valley. So there's a little bit of history there. So my job at Ebbets Field was to take care of the balls, which start out with 4 or 5 dozen balls. Today they probably use 15 to 20 because a little scuff up today, the umpire throws them out. Those days, if they were scrubbed up, a little rougher so a pitcher could get a better spin on it, they would throw them out, but a little dirt on them didn't make any difference. As a matter of fact, my job also was to take the shine off the ball. And we had special dirt they said in those days that dirt came from down in Delaware County. The people down there didn't know where Delaware County was, but I did. They said it came from around the Andes, Margaretville area. So there's a little more history there. That's where the dirt, and they'd have a box of dirt there, and I would get a ball with my hand and rub them up to get the shine off from them so that it wouldn't be shiny for the pitchers to get an advantage to the batter. And of course, it would give the pitcher a little advantage too, that it wasn't so slippery, so that he could get a better spin on the ball. So that was one of my jobs. I sat right next to the dugout, right on the edge there, and if you ever notice at a game, after a few foul balls, they head up the stand, the umpire will look over to the right, because that's usually the home field dugout, and a kid would run out with 4 or 5 balls. And that's what I had to do. The umpire would look over and he'd give me 3, 4, 5 that he needed, because he had a pouch on it. If you ever notice, an umpire has a pouch on the right hip with the balls in it. So he would give me the signal, I would run out, put the balls in, come back, the game would only be second stop, and it would continue. So, that in summary was how I got the job and what my services were. But Jackie, to get into more of his personal details, he was an amazing person. In talking to me, playing with him in the pepper or warm-ups, and as I look at his biological history, he was born a couple of days after me, so we were Aquarians. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but we are Aquarians, or were Aquarians, whatever way you want to say. And how his background is, which I don't know. I know Gary probably knows a lot of his background because he's a big reader on baseball. He was born in 1919 in Cairo, Georgia. There were 5 siblings, 4 boys, 1 girl. The father ran away, went to Florida when he was a young boy. So the mother had a brother in California, name of Mac, I think it was. As a matter of fact, I had read that he was the Olympic track star in 1936. That would be Jackie Robinson's mother's brother, his uncle. So she moved to Pasadena, California, and he got jobs like anybody else as a young person and went to Pasadena Junior College. Of course, he was quite an athlete, obviously. So he enrolled in UCLA as a star. As a matter of fact, his best sport was football as a halfback. Good runner, he was strong. He was the only one that I've heard about that had 4 letters in 1 year in college. Football, basketball, baseball, and track. That's quite a feat, and still keep up with your studies. In those days, they didn't have tutors and somebody would just pass you through because your scholarship. He had to earn his way. So he was a 4-star letterman in 1 year at UCLA. And then he went in the Army. And he rose to a commissioned officer. But he saw a lot of bigotry, prejudice, and I think that's what got him more thinking towards his ultimate goals. He couldn't go into the commissary because he was black. And excuse me if I use the word black, but the book's on him, and everything else calls them black. I know today it's not politically wise to use it that way, but in all the write-ups on him, they're talking about black. So I'm hoping I'm not offending anybody, with that word. Anyway, he couldn't go into restaurants, he couldn't ride the buses, he couldn't do the things that other military guys would do. Think about that. Here he's fighting for the country, and he couldn't do the same things that other military guys were doing. So anyway, he got out, finally, in the 40s, after World War II, 45-ish or so. And Branch Rickey, who was the owner of the Dodgers, was quite a shrewd businessman. He developed the St. Louis Cardinals before that with a farm system. His feelings were you can get better ball players by grooming them, finding them, grooming them, loyalty, building them up, instead of trading or paying them big salaries. And he was right, more so in those days than today. So somehow he found out about Robinson in California. So he visited him. Well, before that, there were other black ball players better than Robinson. That he interviewed them. He didn't like them because they weren't the type he figured that could break the barrier. Because there'd be a fighting type person, argumentative type person, wouldn't take the abuse, whatever. And there were a lot of good black ball players. As a matter of fact, if you go back in history, I'm sure Gary's read this, at the end of the baseball seasons in those late 40s, the black ball players were playing on teams for $100 a game, barnstorming around. They couldn't make any more money, nobody wanted them. They would challenge the stars in the American League or National League and beat them on some barnstorming tours to show how talented they were. They were exceptionally beautiful. You've heard of a lot of them. Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell, the guy that says, I'm so fast I can turn off the switch and jump in bed before the light goes out. What was his name?
Cool Papa Bell.
What?
Cool Papa Bell.
That was a Cool Papa Bell,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah.
I was thinking it was the other guy.
No.
Anyway, so Branch Rickey signed him. And, of course, it was a big hoot. I remember as a kid, I was only 13, 14 years old. And I was reading about it because I had an allegiance to the Dodgers, which was before I went there. But because my uncle was always coming up to visit us on the farm, I was following them, reading them in the papers and all that. Well, they signed him, put him up in Montreal, which was the farm team of the Dodgers. And set the International League on fire. He was only there 1 year, and they said, we got to get him in the major leagues. But there was a lot of hoodoo, because baseball didn't want him, the way things were in life. So Rickey says, we're going to have him there, we're going to have him playing, but he had to really instruct Jackie to be cool, not get feisty, not do things that would set the pace back many years before it could happen. Because at that point in time, there were no black football players, there were no black professionals, no black basketball players, none in baseball. So he had to set the foundation for the future. And Rickey knew that he would be the one that could do it. Well, by the time I got to Brooklyn in 40 and 50, he'd been there 3 years. But by that time, he was getting a little more feisty. And he was getting away with it because there were other black ball players then on other teams. I can remember going to some of the games with the words coming out of the other dugout towards him were terrible. Vile. As a matter of fact, I heard one umpire say, when I was there rubbing up the balls and doing my job, if that black NSOB opens up his mouth once today, he's ejected. He's ejected. We're not going to put up with it, because by that time he would argue for the cause more than necessarily for the particular incident on the field. When he was going to Cincinnati, St. Louis, real southern states, he was abused terribly. Worse, Ben Chapman, the manager of the Phillies, says, when he comes to Philadelphia and plays, we're not showing up for the game. We're not going to play them today with that fellow playing. Well, of course, by that time, the president of the league, Ford Frick, says, you're going to play. You can't just do that. You can't just say we're not going to play because one player is that way. So after a while, this all simmered down, so that it didn't have the great publicity that had built up by that time. So some of the statistics on Jackie, he was old coming up because of the cause. He was 28 when he got to the Dodgers. He was born in 1919, and then he came in 47, 28 years old. He only played 10 years because you get a ball player in the 30s, their body begin to weaken. They don't have the alertness. They don't have the various attributes you need to be as sharp as the ones in the early 20s. As a matter of fact, he was a diabetic. So I assume that had an effect upon him when he got into the 30s. So he retired in 1957. He was 38 years old. He retired basically for two reasons. Dodgers had gotten a new general manager, not the field manager, the general manager, and a new owner, O'Malley. And they were shrewd people, and they said, we'll trade him over to the Giants over in Harlem, because he will draw the crowds there in Harlem because it was a money game. So they called Jackie and says, well, we're going to trade you over to the Giants. He says, no, you're not. He says, I'll never put the Giants uniform on. I'll retire. I'm a Dodger, will always be a Dodger. I'm not going. So he didn't go. Then he got a job at Chuck Full of Nuts as one of the CEO officials with the company in New York City. Chuck Full of Nuts was a big coffee maker, as you know, and his job was $45,000 a year. A man of that publicity, but this is in 1957. So right after that, of course, the new owner of the Dodgers, they went ahead and moved to California, got the Giants to move to California, and that was the end of Jackie's baseball career. He didn't follow up as being a coach or a manager or anything. He stayed with Chuck Full of Nuts. But what really probably troubled him the most, his son, Jack Jr., died as a late teenager down in Long Island. And I think I'm right on this, but I don't want to create a scandal, but I think it was something to do with drugs. Is that right, Gary? Yeah. That he died, and that devastated him. In 1950, he was only 53 years old when he died because of his diabetes. It had a big hold on his body. He went blind, and he died. But before that, that would have been in 1972, he was taken into the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown in, I think, 1962. And he went in with Bob Feller, who was a great historical player in those days and lived to be almost 100 years old. We saw him pitch in Cooperstown in an old timers game when he was 95 years old. Yeah, he did. Yeah. Am I right, Ed? Were you there at the game? Yep. Didn't pitch long. He was able to get the ball over the plate. His ability was amazing. So, he died at the young age. But his legacy goes on. As he said many times, it isn't what a man accomplishes, it's what the legacy brings about from him, which is so true, because he had a goal to break the barrier, which he did in his lifetime by experiencing these personal experiences that he had. And therefore, when they got his plaque in the Hall of Fame, he's the first black ball player in the Hall of Fame. And then since then, of course, they've had many because he was a great athlete. Their athletes are so great. Now, I got some memorabilia up here, and I saw a big Dodger fan around here someplace with a jacket on. Where is he? There he is over there, my friend. We were talking. He's been to Eversfield many times, he said. So I'm glad to see that, and I'm hoping some of your others here will come up and see this. In the meantime, if you have any questions, bring them up, write down. I'll try to answer them. Yes?
This is just a bit of trivia. Jim Thorpe played 4 college sports, too.
What's that?
Jim Thorpe played 4 college sports, too.
Is it same season?
Say it's in college.
Yeah, but in college, but he did it in the same year.
Rickey, so did Jim Thorpe.
You think Thorpe did the same year?
Yeah.
Okay.
He played football, baseball, track and field, and lacrosse.
And in Syracuse University, there's only been 2 players that have ever had 4 letters in their career there. One was Jimmy Brown, the football star, and the other was Jim Constantine from the area. They played 4 sports in Syracuse University. The only 2 guys that ever come out of Syracuse University that got 4 letters. Yes?
Was Dixie Walker there when you were there?
No. They traded Dixie because he was from the South, and he was so prejudiced, they thought he would create too much of a furor. Dixie Walker was a great ball player. When I was younger, following him. They traded him to Cincinnati, I think, which was a southern town, and they weren't prejudiced, so they got him there. No, he wasn't there. No, Dixie was. They had traded him before that, and I don't remember who they got. Yes?
Just 2 quick questions. Did Luke Snider play when you were there?
I didn't hear you, sir.
Did Luke Snider play when you were there?
Oh, Lord, yes. He was the star, dude.
And one more quick question about your photo up there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, this picture up here is...
Yogi said he was safe.
Yeah.
Was he safe or out? Was he out or safe? Yogi said he was out.
Yogi said he was safe.
Yogi said he was out.
That creates a... Anyway, how many are Yankee fans here?
Yogi said he was out. Was he out or not?
This is historical.
That's great.
Jackie Robinson was the only ball player that could steal home so many times.
Yep.
Ty Cobb could,
Yep.
some of these others. He stole home 20 times in his 10-year career, which is quite a feat when you think of it. Because a pitcher 60 feet away is throwing the ball to the catcher, the runner's 90 feet away from third base. But he was smart. He could read the pitcher. He was so smart. And if that pitcher did something to slow him up, he'd be off like a deer. He'd be off like a deer and beat for. He'd be out sometimes on a close play. But this is historical, this picture. This was in the, I think, the 1955 World Series when the Yankees were beating the Dodgers, 2 games to none or 2 games to 1. And they were behind the Dodgers around the 5th inning. And so Jackie stole home, allegedly. Because Yogi Berra jumped off the ground about 3 feet and took it to his grave that he had him out. But the umpire called him safe. The umpire ruled. And ironically, the umpire is an American League umpire from the American League who was standing behind Yogi. which of course shouldn't enter into it, but you know, always wonder sometimes. But he was in favor of Robinson stealing home. Well, that excited the crowd, excited the team. They come on, the Dodgers, and won the World Series. Yogi was, oh.
You actually saw that game then?
What was
You
that?
actually were at that game? You were actually at that game?
No, I wasn't at that game. No, I was there in 1950. As a matter of fact, one pitch kept me from being in the World Series because of Jim Constanti, who lived in Worcester, made a bad play as a pitcher that cost me the winning run. That because it's sort of an ironic play if you're interested in knowing if you're baseball fans. Dodgers had a man on second base and one out in the ninth inning in a tie game, 1-on-1. They brought Constanti in as a reliever. And of course, I knew Jim. I knew his son very well. As a lawyer, I called him a dumb Polak because he was Polish from Buffalo. We had the winning run on second base in the ninth inning. A good fast runner. And Duke Snider was out. So they called for a pickoff at second to keep the runner from getting too much of a lead. Well, Constanti missed the call. He pitched home. Snider had a shot into center field, but the center fielder was coming up to back up second base. Center fielder got the shot right behind second base, 20, 30 feet, threw it home and got the runner out, and they went extra innings, and the Phillies won. The Phillies got in the World Series. That pitch cost me from being in the World Series. So I always teased Jim Constanti about that. Question?
Just one season that you were a ball boy, just one season?
Just one season. You know. They tried to rotate. Well, you got a lot of them down there that wanted to do it. You know, you can imagine in Brooklyn, all the kids down there in those days. And I only had the in through my uncle who worked there. So, yeah.
Did you get to travel with the team though, or just stay in Brooklyn? Did you get to travel with the team?
No, it's amazing. Those days they would cut the traveling expenses because of expenses. None of the extra personality went on the road. As a matter of fact, the road games in those days, they all went by railroad. Railroad. Because there were 4 Western teams and 4 Eastern teams. The Eastern teams was the Boston Braves, the Dodgers, the Giants in New York, and the Philadelphia Phillies. Then they would get on the train for a 2-week tour to the West teams, which was Cincinnati, St. Louis, Pittsburgh Pirates, and Chicago Cubs. But they'd be on a sleeper train. Yeah. And even Red Barber, the announcer, didn't go many times because I would listen to the games on radio. We didn't have TV, and it would be on teletype. And he would get on teletype, right? You're smiling. And then he would rebroadcast it from teletype. Yeah. And well, that's the way it was in those days to cut expenses. They'd be training it to those 4 Western towns. But the 2 weeks when they were on the road, I'd come back home. Make my mother happy, but then go back again.
Do you feel that Gil Hodges should be in the Hall of Fame?
There's a lot of talk on it. He was a true gentleman, a real honor to the sport, Gil Hodges. There's been a lot of talk about that.
Because I'm a Mets fan, and that's one of the reasons,
Yeah.
because of '69.
He was an honor to the game as a player, as a manager. He was a real gentleman.
Yep. He
Yeah.
did a few home runs, too.
Yep. And he had a lot of home runs. Yep. As in the newspaper article there, I did see that where he hit the 4 home runs in one game. And I saw Joe Adcock of the Boston Braves do that too in Evansville that same year. Joe Adcock hit 4. Yeah.
You mentioned Jim Constanti, you knew Jim Constanti. Is there a story about Jim Constanti that made him who he was?
Well, yeah, this is something historical too, but it's Otsego County. You can't. He was a good friend of Skinner, Andy Skinner, in the funeral home. I knew Andy very well too. He was a great friend of Andy. So they lived next door, as a matter of fact. And Andy was a big student of the game. He wanted to be a doctor, and studied, but his father was in the funeral business, died, he had to come back and run the funeral home. But he was very smart, Andy Skinner. And so Jim Constanti was not a great pitcher. He was kicking around the minor leagues. So Skinner could see there was a little fault in his movements. So he took him into the old Worcester School gym in the wintertime and worked out with him. You know, when the school was in session, but when there's no gym classes, he would have him there and he would watch his movements. And he got him developing what they call the palm ball. Because Constanti had big hands, big fingers on him like his son. And he developed a palm ball so that, and some of the kids that I know around Worcester used to go up there now that are adults, older, they used to catch him. They'd say, Constanti, you could put that glove there, boom. Put your glove there, boom. His control was immense, but this palm ball got him a different pitch so that when he got in the major leagues, that's what kept him there. And the year that he beat us, he was the MVP of the American League that year, Constanti. He was the MVP. Yeah.
But whenever he had a hitch in his giddy-up, didn't the Phillies call him in?
Yeah, you mean to sign him up? Yeah, that's another story. Skinner told me the story that after he was MVP, Carpenter, who was the owner of the Phillies, called up Constanti and said, we got to see you about signing next year. It was along in January, February. Come on down, we got to talk about what we're going to do next year and signing you up. So Constanti said, Jesus, Skinner, come on down with me. He said, I don't know what to ask for. I don't know what to do. Come on down. So, of course, they went together. So they talked on the way to going down to Philadelphia. Carpenter was the owner of the Phillies. They went into his office. They said he had a table as long as this room almost, but the director wouldn't be as long as this room, but a long table where the directors all sat. They sat down, they chatted for a few minutes, and he says, well, what do you think there, Mr. Constanti? So he said, well, what do you want to offer us? Because Skinner had them all prepped what to do. So Carpenter says, we're going to offer you $100,000. Skinner says, we'll take it. Didn't take long to sign the contract. Yeah.
Did you ever see Jackie Robinson after his career?
No. I did write him a letter once. I still got the letter. It sort of got some memories to it. When I got out of law school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no office, no family lawyers. And I said, yeah, maybe I'll get a hold of Robinson to see if there's anything in Chuck full of nuts. So I wrote him a letter, a nice letter, and he didn't answer. But by that time, I don't even know if he was still in Chuck full of nuts, because that was in 1960, and he was not well in those days because of his diabetes. You know. But I thought he could have had somebody else respond, you know. Yeah.
I was just reading lately on that 50 season.
What's that, Gary?
The Phillies were up 9 games on September 12th.
Yeah.
And the Dodgers were within a game, and you said that 9th inning there. They had first and second with no outs, and Snider hit the single. And the only reason they threw him out, because Ashburn had a weak arm. Like you said, the only reason they threw him out is because of that pickoff.
Constanti missed the call. He kept me out of the because if he'd have thrown home to Snider, Snider was a strong hitter. If Ash would have been deep center field, he wouldn't have been coming in behind second base.
Do you remember if, I think the Milt Stock was the third base coach? If he got lambasted by the players
Yeah,
or the media?
because they started on home, he should have held him up when he saw Ash with no ball right behind second base. Should have held him up. You know, I had one out, and then they'd have men on first and third. But I guess he frantic, thinking, or he didn't see Ashburn coming in. He was watching the runner or whatever, and you know. So you got history there. Yes.
How would you rate Campanella against Bearer?
Roy Campanella?
Yeah, as far as quality catcher.
He was very quiet, kept to himself. I didn't have any association with Campanella. He was a great ball player. They probably, and he was older coming up. He probably was one of the best catchers ever known. You know, they talk about Yogi Berra, but Yogi Berra's lifetime batting average isn't as good as Campanella. My trouble with Campanella, he only played like 10 years because of age, and Yogi Berra played 18 to 20 years. The longevity was only because he didn't get there early enough. Campanella was in the late 20s instead of coming in at 20. Yeah, because he had that motor vehicle accident too that paralyzed him, so he couldn't play anymore. But Campanella won 3 or 4 MVPs in the National League. Yeah, an all-star player every year. Yeah. Yes.
Probably my worst memory in baseball is when Bobby Thompson hit the home run.
Oh, yeah. I died that day. I died. I was listening to it on the radio. Died.
You and me both.
You died too.
Yeah.
They had it made. They had it made. They always think Leo DeRocher stole the sign because it was in the Polo Grounds and the outfield was the clubhouse. And they think they had cameras out there stealing the catcher's signs. Did you ever hear that story? Yeah. DeRocher was the manager of the Giants, and DeRocher was DeRocher. As a matter of fact, there's a story in the book there that DeRocher and Robinson didn't get along. DeRocher was a Southern guy. And so one day, they said in the book that Robinson walked by the Giants dugout and DeRocher was heckling him. He said, "I think I smell Lorraine Day's perfume." Because Lorraine Day was his wife, or his girlfriend, or whatever.
This is a follow-up to Bobby Thompson's home run. It was hit in the Polo Grounds.
Right.
And the Polo Grounds had a very, very short
Left field.
as well as right field.
Right.
The question, I guess, is would that have been a normal fly ball out?
Probably so. Because it just, yeah. There's only 250 some feet down in that corner in the Polo Grounds. And a normal outfield fence is 300, 330. So they figured that it would have been just a fly ball back towards the fence, he'd have caught it. But in the Polo Grounds, he hit it down the line, which was short, 257 feet, I think it's all it is. Yeah. A thing I forgot to mention, though, too, along with the abuse that he got, was, and I meant to talk this when he was playing, that in those days, the baseball shoes were leather, and they had steel spikes. That's what I wore, too, when I was down to Ebbets Field. There was a steel plate on the heel, and then a steel plate on the toe. And these players, the Southern players, didn't like Robinson, would file those steel plates to make them sharp. So when he slid into the bases, they were down there, you know, bringing their foot up to spiking. They call it spiking them, which was a steel plate. And it was so bad, sometimes it would rip his shoe. It would rip that leather shoe, tear the shoe. Yeah. Yeah. It was so gruesome that they were abusing him. But he was able to take it until he started fighting back 2 or 3 years later when there was more of them in the major leagues. And but the first year, he kept his mouth shut, and he had to, and that's why Rickey got him, because he had instructed him, coached him, told him that you're going to be the foundation of this baseball history if you mouth off and get into trouble.
Are those all autographed?
Yeah,
baseballs?
yeah. I got autographs from every team in the National League that year, plus all the umpires, and I got some other miscellaneous ones here. And I got pictures here of Ebbets Field and the surrounding area, showing Bedford Avenue, where Snider could always hit the home runs into Bedford Avenue, right? Over the right field wall. As a matter of fact, the game that Constantine beat us, that last game, the Phillies were ahead 1-0 in the 5th or 6th inning, and Pee Wee Reese hit a ball, sort of ironic, and there's a big screen there in right field over the brick wall, right? And the ball stuck in the screen. But the ground rule was, it's still a home run. It didn't get over the screen. It jammed into the net. Pee Wee runs the bases. The ground rule was it's a ground rule home run. And that tied the game 1-1 until the Phillies won at the end. Another little side story. You know, there was no air conditioning in the dugouts in the days or fans. I don't even remember fans, you know, to circulate there. It'd be hot. You get in those ballparks with the metal and the sun in the summertime. And Carl Frillo was a big smoker. Remember Carl Frillo, of course. He was a great player for the Dodgers. Between innings, he had a pack of cigarettes up on the steel girder down in the runway. And he'd go down that runway, because you couldn't smoke in the dugout. They wouldn't allow that, baseball management wouldn't. He'd go down in that runway and light up a cigarette. I saw him do it many, many times. Yeah. Yeah, Ed.
Who was field manager, Marv, the time you were there? Field manager.
What?
The manager of the Dodgers.
Oh, that year was Bert Shotton. Yeah, he was only there for a year or two. He wore a suit. Not a baseball suit, he wore a dress suit. Bert Shotton, his picture is here with the team. Yeah, with that year.
And how was the food in the clubhouse?
Ham sandwiches and soda. And I feast there like crazies. Yeah. When the double headers came, they used to play double headers most every Sunday in those days. Started double header at 1 o'clock. And then after the first game was over, the players would come down in the clubhouse, have ham sandwiches and Coke, orange, whatever they had there, change uniforms. It was so hot, the uniforms were just soaking wet. They'd change their uniforms and put on fresh uniforms, 20-minute, half-hour wait, come out for the second game of the doubleheader. And to show how versatile the players were in those days and how great. Today, of course, a pitcher goes 100 pitchers, and they have to pull them out because the statistics say after 100 pitches, your arm's weakening or you're losing your stuff. Newcomb, during that same year that the Phillies challenging the Phillies, Newcomb, they're down in Philadelphia, this game was, he pitched the first game, shut him out, went down into the clubhouse, changed his uniform, started the second game a half hour later, pitched 5 more innings of shutout. Can't do any more. So he took, told the manager to bring in a reliever. They beat the Phillies in a doubleheader, which helped them get down because the Phillies were ahead during all the season that year. The Dodgers were always playing catch-up that year. Mm-hmm. Right, Gary? Mm-hmm. Okay, anything else? I got to tell you a quick story. There was an old-timer in Worcester that a farmer, and he was head man in the Eastern Milk Producers, the co-op for selling milk to a cooperative. And he used to go around speaking. He was quite a pompous, old-time guy, and he loved to talk and so on. So he's there at this one meeting at the table. He's a big guy. And before they introduced him, before he started his talk, his wife sat next to him, and she slipped a note over to him. The note says, K-I-S-S. So he leaned down, he was going to kiss her. And she says, "No, I don't need that, Bob." She says, "Keep it short, stupid." That's about the end of it. Unless you got some more questions. You gave me your question, Ed.
What was Robertson's average?
What was the batting average?
Yeah.
It was over 300. 305, I think, is his lifetime batting average. Yeah. The year I was there, he batted around 320, 330. Yeah. He was a line drive hitter. He wasn't a power hitter. And he had a funny swing. He sort of swung with his whole body. His leverage was on his upper torso. Yeah. And he could hit line drives. He would hit sharp line drives, which gave him the base hits. Yeah.
Didn't Monty Irvin and Paul Jackson a year later play for Giants?
Monty Irvin, same with the Giants act. But he had to be there the year I was there, Irvin, with the Giants.
Was he the second black player to come through? Monty Irvin? No.
Larry Doby might have been a Cleveland.
Doby
or Irvin?
Doby.
What?
Doby.
Doby.
Cleveland.
Larry Doby of Cleveland.
Did you see Monty Irvin play? I met Monty Irvin in Cooperstown.
Yeah.
Did you see him play? I never seen him.
Yeah, I saw him play with the Giants. Yeah. Yeah. He was a good player, and he was a historical man because he rose into up high in the baseball field in the National League offices, like personnel director or whatever. Yeah. Yes, Cindy.
Mrs. Robinson.
Yes, I met her once. Mrs. Robinson's a marvelous woman, Rachel. She's still alive, lives in California. She comes to a lot of these historical meetings with baseball. She's 90-some years old. She's really a marvelous person. And I met her once, somehow, I don't know.
She went to the games?
Pardon?
She went to the games?
Oh, sure. Yeah. They live right there in Brooklyn. All the players live right there. Today they live over in New Jersey or Connecticut or wherever. They all lived in Brooklyn. Yeah. Right close by. Yeah. I lived in Queens. I had to take the elevated train, then subway, 2 or 3 transfers, but I know my way. If it was a night game, I'd hop the subway all day and ride around, see the city, get out and walk. It was an event for me as a farm kid coming into Brooklyn, New York City.
Was it normal for the next year to have new ballboys, or is anybody hired back in that position?
What was that now?
Like in 1951, did they ask you back?
No.
Just a 1 year.
I just went to one season. Because they had others, I'm sure. My uncle didn't have that kind of clout.
Did you get paid? Did you get paid?
Yes, $2 a game. Yeah. I come back with a couple of $100. Carl Frillo, 1 year, was the highest batting average in the league of 345 or something. They gave him $7,500 the next year. That's how salaries work. Yeah. Okay, one more?
Well, I just wanted to mention that in the day when I was a kid, and my uncle used to take me to the Brooklyn Dodger games in Ebbets Field. Next month, at the end of April, we're going to New York to celebrate his 99th birthday.
Wow. Great. Yeah. There's a lot of history with the Dodgers. Vin Scully is classic. Announcer. He was there. He was there when I went there. He was the red-haired guy, and it was his first or second year there. He started in 48, 49, and went to Los Angeles and just retired. He had 70-some years as an announcer. Can you imagine? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Glad you came. Come up and see some of the memorabilia if you want.
Marv was kind enough to come and speak with us today and refuse the honoraria. So I'm racking my brain, what can I do to thank Uncle Marv for coming? So I thought to myself, well, if he can't be at the ballpark, we'll bring the ballpark to him. So here is everything that the song says you need. Peanuts, popcorn, and Cracker Jacks.
I'll eat it.